Hi everybody, it's Michael and I'm back with another of my walkthrough videos. Today I want to show you Last Will, or the letzte Wille, how it's called in German. This is a game for 2 to 5 players, ages 13 and up. On playtime it says 45 to 75 minutes, especially 2-player games go rather quick. Little spoiler alert, I will show you a complete 2-player game in this video. It's designed by Vladimír Suchý, who is, I guess, famous for 20th century and also Shipyard. And I think he has proven that he is able to design economic games by these 2 previous titles. This is also kind of an economic game, but it has a very interesting premise and story. And I guess if you have heard anything about this game, you already know this, but let me tell you nevertheless. Basically the players are all related to each other and they're rich, but a little distant uncle has died. And this fella has made money, and a lot of money, during the Industrial Revolution in England. And basically on his deathbed he realized that while he has earned a lot of money in his days, he has never had the time to spend it, and therefore he kind of thinks that he hasn't really lived. And now in his last will and testament he basically puts forth that his potential heirs should do different than him, and they should prove that they can live wisely by spending money and live leisurely, I guess. And so basically the goal of the game is to spend money. You all start with a fixed amount of money, basically taken from the inheritance, and whoever spends this the quickest has proven to the uncle, or rather his lawyers, that he is actually fit to inherit everything and also, well, win the game. So while this is an economic game, it's kind of backwards because you don't build an engine to earn money, but spend money instead. And yeah, one final note, this is a German copy, but apart from all the names of the cards, it doesn't matter because the effects of the cards are with language independent iconography, and this is rather clever, I think. And yeah, I'll now show you a 2-player game. Yeah, have fun. Okay, let's take a brief look at the components for the game. In the middle we have the board. Over here we have a round marker. The game will play out over a maximum amount of 7 rounds. Here we have the planning space. Then we have the different errands and the spaces where cards are offered, and I'll explain those later when they come up. Over here we have a bank with some money in it. Since the purpose of the game is spending money and not earning it, we don't actually have so much to put in the bank here, just a little bit for making change. Then here we have the companion and property markers. Here we have the extensions for the player boards. And then we have the various card decks. These are properties, these are events, helpers and expenses, companions, companion wildcards, and finally the special cards, and they have 3 categories, 1, 2 and 3 crowns. Shuffle each category by its own and then stack them onto each other, so the one with just 1 crown is on top. And then we have the areas for the 2 players. They're basically the same, so let's take a look at the blue player. Here you have the player board where you can put 5 cards. You have a marker to mark your actions. You have 70 bucks to start with. You have 2 errand boys, these are the top hats. You have a planning marker, and because of the special 2-player rule, you also have a planning marker of an unused color. And the blue player is the starting player. Same for the red player. And finally, each player has a starting hand of 6 cards, 3 properties and 3 helpers and expenses. One word about the money. So right now everybody starts with £70, and that is actually what's recommended for a first game. For future games you can use cards that randomly determine the amount of money you start with, and I think it varies between £70 and £120. But for this game we're using £70. Okay, those were the components, and then we're ready to start the game. As I said, the game can play out over a maximum of 7 rounds. Why a maximum of 7 rounds? Because if a player manages to spend all his money before the 7th round, then the game will end in that round, and players can continue to spend money and go further into debt, and whoever has the least money or the most debt at this point is the winner. If, for example, if there's more money, for example, if the players have to spend £120, then this is far more likely that by the end of the 7th round, nobody has spent all their money. Then whoever has the least money left is the winner. Okay, so the first phase in any round is the setup. And in the setup phase, basically all these spaces here are filled with cards. So let's take a look. Here it says, in the 1st to the 3rd round, put a property card there. The same is here with an helper and expense card. Also helper and expense card here. Here we put a companion wild card. And up here, 3 special cards. Now, only in the 1st round, after the setup, all the players have to discard their initial hand down to 2 cards. So now that they see what will be available in the 1st round, they can decide which cards to keep and which not. And for this, I've just laid out the cards here. And the red player decides that this training ground and this farmyard are a nice combo, so he decides to keep them and discard the rest. And we will look at these cards in detail later on when they're played, so no worries here. And the blue player decides to keep his carriage and the coach driver, because that's also a nice combo. Okay, so each player now has only 2 cards left, and then we can go into the second phase. Okay, the second phase is the planning phase, where each player decides how to spend their day. And it revolves around this area on the board here. And by selecting a column, you basically decide on 3 things, or you choose 3 things. First, where you will be in turn order, because it will be resolved from the left to the right. Second, how many cards you can draw immediately from one of the decks. Third, how many errand boys you will be able to place in the errand phase. And finally, how many actions you will be able to use or perform in the action phase. And normally in a 3 to 5 player game, each player would take their planning marker, put it on a column, and use their benefits. However, in the 2 player game, each player also has a marker of a different color. And now, starting with blue, because he's a start player, he will put his not player marker in one of the columns, basically blocking it for himself and the other player. And he decides to block this column because this gives a little bit of everything. Now, the red player first also places a marker that is not his own, and he decides to block this space because he doesn't want the blue player to go first later on, and then he takes this space for himself. And finally, the blue player, since he's already going last, he decides to take this very last spot. Now, normally, each time you place down your planning marker, you immediately draw this amount of cards. But those were only the blocking markers, so nothing happened here. And the red player actually didn't get any cards, but now the blue player can draw 2 cards from any decks as he likes, but he can't take special cards and he can't take a companion wild card. And what he decides is to take an event card and a companion card. Okay, now the 3rd phase, that's the errand phase. And in the new player order, basically going left to right, so red starts, each player puts down one of their errand boys on one of the possible spaces on the board. So the red player claims one of these spaces, and these spaces work that the first player who puts down here gets to choose one of the 3 cards up here, because they're all connected by this line, and the second player gets to choose from the other 2 cards, and the 3rd card can't be taken. And the red player would like to take this animal market. Then it's blue player's turn, and the blue player would like to take this school buddy. Then, because both can place 2 errand boys this turn, it's red player's turn again, and he decides to go down here to the property or real estate market and manipulate the prices. And he's planning to build a farm later on, so it would be good if farms were actually very expensive, because then he can buy high. And finally, the blue player with his last errand boy decides to send him to the opera, where he's allowed to just spend $2. Okay, then that was the 3rd phase, errands. And now the 4th phase is where the players actually take their actions. And since the red player starts, he's allowed to take his actions first, and he gets 3 of them. So if we look over here, we mark that he has 3 actions, so that it's easier for us to see how many he is still left. And then we start. First of all, he would like to buy this farmyard. If you buy something, you have to put it on your board, and on your board here you see that there's a red A, so that will actually cost you 1 action. Also, the price for this is normally 12, but he manipulated the market, so farmyards are at +3. You can see that the green icons match. So actually he has to pay 15 for that. So that's his first action. Putting down the farmyard, paying an action, and paying 15 bucks. Now this might not be as powerful as it seemed, because although he spent 15, he still has this, and this is a property, and you can never go into debt while you still have property. But more on that later. As a second action, the red player decides to place this animal market. It's an event, it has a white border, so it's just a one-shot card and it is discarded afterwards. And first he has to pay an action, as we see by the red A up here, so he's down to 1 action. And basically what it does, that you can put 2 animals on farmyards, and these animals can either be dogs or horses. So on his farmyard there are 2 spaces for animals, 1 dog and 1 horse. So what we do is we put down 1 dog and 1 horse, and normally putting down these animals would require you first to have an actual companion card of that type and to pay an action to put them down. So basically by this event he has saved himself a lot of trouble. What does it mean if there's a dog and a horse down here now? Basically, each time you would activate the farmyard, normally if you don't have any animals, you could spend £2 by that for maintaining it. But now, since there are 2 animals, you can actually pay £7 for maintaining the farmyard by paying 1 action. And this card is just discarded. And finally, for his third action, he decides to play this training ground, and it costs him his last action. And the training ground without an action, because here's a red A, for example, here it isn't. So what you can do with that is you can just activate it without paying an action, and you can pay £2 per farmyard that you own. He owes 1 farmyard, so that's another £2 gone. He can't activate his farmyard because that would actually be an action, so basically the red player is done. The blue player also has 3 actions from his planning. And with the first action, he decides to play that school buddy. It costs an action, but he also gives him an action forever from now on. And it also counts this turn, so basically we can just leave the marker where it is. Then, as the next action, he is playing a carriage. Then he's playing a coach driver. And finally, since he has 1 action left, he decides to throw a nice evening soiree or something like that. And that costs an action. It's an event, white bordered, and he is able to spend £2. So those were all his actions, but the action on the carriage doesn't cost anything. Normally it would cost 2, but because he has his own carriage driver, which gives all these icons, all these other cards with the little stagecoach, +1 expenses, by activating his stagecoach, he can pay another 3. And those were the blue player's actions. Now the 5th phase is basically only cleaning up, and several things happen. First, each player has to discard down to 2 cards, but the red player doesn't have any cards left, and the blue player only has 1. So nothing happens here. Then all of the properties would depreciate, but no player has values that can properties that can actually depreciate, so nothing happens here. Then each of the activated cards needs to go back. After that, we just clean off everything off the board, both cards and markers, and after that we increase the round number and switch the start player token. So I'll just clean up the board and be right back. Okay, as you can see, I've already used the break to set up the new cards. So basically the setup of the second round is done. So the planning begins. And now the red player goes first. And what he does is he blocks this space for the blue player. Then the blue player blocks this space and puts his marker here, so he can draw 2 cards immediately, and he decides to draw 2 helper and expenses cards. And finally, the red player, who would also like the maximum amount of actions and errands left, goes down here and also draws 2 cards, and he decides to draw an event and a property. Then the blue player can start his errands, and he places his errand boy here and is allowed to pick up this summer house. The red player wants this steward up here. Then the blue player is manipulating the market to make the summer house that he just acquired the most expensive possible, and also since he just saw the other player picking up the steward for farms, he decides to make farms as cheap as possible. And then finally the red player moves here and takes this companion wild card. Okay, starting with the actions. The red player gets 3 actions, and first of all he decides to buy yet another farmyard, although the prices are not very good. I mean, actually the prices are good, but not good for him. So -3 and 8, he only has to pay 5 for this new farmyard. That was the first action. Then as a second action, he decides to use an action to put a dog on this farm. And he can do that by discarding his wild card, because there's a dog on here as well. So we just increase down to 1 action and put a dog down here. And then finally, he would like to play the steward, but the problem is the steward costs +1 action to play, so actually 2, and he has only 1 left. So this will have to wait until next round. So with his last action, he just decides to maintain and activate this farmyard, which allows him to spend £7. And although all his actions are done, using the training ground doesn't cost any action to activate, so this is 2 per farmyard. Farmyard now he has 2, so that's another 4 that he can spend. The blue player has 2 actions, +1 from the school friend, that's 3. And for his first action, he decides to buy the summer house. Normally it costs 10, +3 is 13. That was his first action. Then, as a second action, he decides to invite a lady friend to his house. So we put a lady friend marker here, and that's another action. And then finally, this is discarded, of course. And then finally, he decides to hire a gardener, which takes care of these orange type of houses and the yellow type of houses, and the summer house is the yellow type, so that'll help. And for his last action, he decides to hire him. Okay, so now all the actions are basically done, but we always have our carriage, which allows us to spend £3. At the end of the round, nobody has to discard any cards. But now we have a property here that can depreciate. And actually when I bought this, I should have placed one of these property markers down here. So I'll do that now. And now since the building, the property wasn't activated and thus maintained this round, it depreciates by 1 step, basically from 10 to 9. So in each round that you don't maintain a property, it depreciates the value. So basically this is a little bit of a trade-off, because if you would activate it, it would allow you to spend money. But if you don't activate it, you also lose little money. And because you never can appreciate, or whatever the opposite of depreciate in this context is, a property, kind of waiting until it goes down and then start maintaining it is probably a little bit better. But we'll see about that. So that was depreciating properties. Then all the cards are set back. After that, we advance the round marker, we flip or switch the start player token, and I'll just clean up the board and set up the board for the next round. Starting the planning phase, the blue player decides to place the blocking marker here. Then the red player is blocking the space and decides that actually he doesn't mind going last. The blue player moves over here. And of course, in the moment that the red player puts down his marker, he gets to draw 2 cards, and he decides for 2 helpers and expenses. And then the blue player can draw his cards, and actually he can draw 5 cards, and he decides to go for 3 properties, an event, and a companion. Okay, errands. The blue player wants a player board extension. So he gets put 1 extension over here next to his board. Red player picks up this tailor. Then the blue player goes up here and takes this extensive party. And then the red player takes this big party. The blue player gets 2 actions, and as his first action he decides to buy this villa, and it costs 15 plus 1, that's 16. And if you take a look, this requires a cook and a lady friend. And although he has a lady friend, he doesn't have a cook. And you have to always place these companions in order, so he can't place his lady friend into the villa right now. And he's down to 1 action, by the way. And then as his last action, he decides to play this extensive party that costs an action, so he's down to 0. But it lets you depreciate your properties 3 times. So basically he can totally depreciate that one. And that one has only 1 step to depreciate, and I also forgot the marker again, but here we go, this one is also now completely depreciated. And yes, since he doesn't have any actions left, both of them would have depreciated anyway by 1, but still that's a net gain of 1 depreciation, basically, and this one is of course discarded because it's an event. And then finally, without an action, he can activate his coach and pay $3. Now the red player has 3 actions, and for the first 2 he decides to place the steward because that costs an additional action. And with his last action he decides to use his tailor, which will give him +3 to any events or activities with this mask. And for example, the opera space here is also one of these spaces because it has this mask. Okay, that were all his actions, but this steward allows him to activate 2 farmyards for free because this action here is crossed out. And he has 2 farmyards. Activating this one will cost him 3. Activating this one will cost him 7, that's 10. And then he still has his training ground, which will be another 2 per farmyard, so that's 14 altogether that he can spend. And he can now do this every turn for free, so that's a nice combo setup. Paying 15, getting 1 back. Okay, then basically at the end of the round, both players have to discard. The blue player decides to keep these cards, so these are gone. Red player decides to keep these 2, so these are gone. Nothing can depreciate because those are already maximum depreciated, and over here we have nothing that can actually depreciate, so these go all back. Starting player, marker, flips, round token is advanced, and I'll do the cleanup. Just a short notice for the setup this turn, since it's now round 4. This will change. Now here will be the second companion wild card instead of a special card. And down here we will now get an event card. The red player decides to block this space. Then the blue player blocks here and moves here, not drawing any cards. And then the red player takes this spot and draws 2 cards. And he decides to draw cards from... he decides to draw 1 event and 1 expense card. The blue player moves up here with his errand boy and decides to take this busy day card. Then the red player decides to go to the opera, and because it's a theater event and he has his tailor, he can actually pay $5. Then blue player gets a companion wildcard, and the red player picks up this waiter. The red player has 3 actions, and before he decides to take any actions, he does his combo again, activating the farmyard for 7, the other farmyard for 3, that's 10, and finally the training ground for 2 per farmyard, that's 14 altogether. So basically he's down to $4, but of course he still has 2 properties. Then, as his first real action, he wants to hire this real estate agent, but he has no space anymore, so he decides to remove this training ground, and for things that are not properties you can always remove them for free. So this one gets discarded, and he can put the real estate agent here for 1 action. So this real estate agent allows you once per turn to make a property action with a farm that can be either selling or buying. This action doesn't cost an action, and it is for -2. So basically, if you use this for selling, that's better, because then you don't get as much money as would have normally. So using this for free, we can sell our more expensive farmyard that would normally cost 12. However, we get 2 less, so that's only 10. And now in the real estate market, farms are at -3. So basically, for this that costs once 12, we only get 5, which is of course great for us. Then with the next action, the red player hires a waiter. And finally plays an event, dinner, which would normally cost 2, but with the waiter that's +1, so that's 3 altogether. And now we're down to £6, but still have 1 property left. The blue player gets 3 plus 1, that's 4 actions. And with the first action, he decides to fill this position for a cook with a wildcard card, and then he can also fill the second position with this lady friend card, so that's 2 actions altogether. And he gets to put a cook here and a lady friend here. Okay, now he can basically activate and maintain both of his properties. Activating and maintaining this one gives him costs him 5 plus 3 from the gardener, and maintaining this one costs him 8 plus 3 from the gardener, so that's 19 altogether. For his last 2 actions he can pay 19. And finally for the stagecoach, that's another 3. So at the end of his turn he has also £6 left, but he still has 2 properties. At the end of the round, nobody has to discard anything. No properties can depreciate. We have to set back all the cards. And then we switch the first player marker, move down the round marker, and of course clean up the blue player this space, because he thinks the red player wants as many actions as possible, but also wants to go rather early. The red player wants to make sure that he goes first while getting as many actions as still possible, so he blocks this one and takes this one, and he gets to draw 2 cards, and he decides to draw 2 event cards. Then finally the blue player decides that he needs to take as many actions as he can, so he goes for 4 actions, and he gets to draw 1 card, and he also takes an event. The red player wants to make sure that he gets this card up here, Then the blue player wants to manipulate the market, and he does it in a way that red's farm will cost the most, and then that the two kinds of manors and houses he has will actually be the least valuable. Then red goes into the opera, paying 5 because of his tailor, so he's down to 1 pound. The red player has 2 actions, and he decides to play this event, the busy day, which basically says pay an action, get another 3. So paying 1 action would bring him down to 1, and then another 3, that's 4 actions. Okay, now the thing is, red still has 1 property left, and as long as he has this, he can't go into debt, so he can't just activate this, paying 3 and going into debt because he has only 1 left. Basically, before he can make any debt, he has to get rid of this. So, using the action on his real estate agent, that he can sell or buy, but sell in this case 1 farmyard for free at -2. Okay, so this thing originally cost 8. -2, that's 6. However, +3, that's 9. So basically he's getting rid of this, and he gets 9. So he's now at 10 again. And then he decides to play this big party, and here you can actually choose how many actions you want to use and then how much this will cost you. And as it turns out, he has 4 actions left. 4 actions will cost him exactly 10 pounds, and that is exactly what he has left. So he manages to break even, or to basically precisely to 0. So, and this will actually mean that the game is over after this round, and the red player is done. Now the blue player has to see whether he's also able to get rid of all his money, or even make debt, because then he would have won. So the blue player starts with 4 actions, +1 from his school buddy, that's 5. And first he also plays a busy day, so basically he is up at 7 actions. Okay, first he uses an action to sell his villa. It's now worth 13 thanks to the depreciation, and -2 from the real estate market, that's 11 that he gets. So that's an action, so he's down to 6 actions, and he gets 11 bucks. Then he activates a summer house, which costs 5 + 3, that's 8, which you can pay. And he's down to 5 actions. Then he decides to sell the summer house, so he's down to 4 actions. The summer house is now still worth 5, -3, that's 2 that he still gets for the house. Okay, he has 4 actions and 11 money left. So, first of all, he can activate his stagecoach for free, that's another 3 money. So, down to 8. Now, with his remaining 4 actions, he could activate also his big party. That would cost him 9, and he would be at -1. So he could do that and would have basically won, because that is more debt than the other player was able to collect. But I think it's even possible to do better. First of all, there's an event, a carriage ride. It costs an action, it costs 4, but we have our own coach driver, so it's actually 5 for 1 action. That's not bad. So we're down to 3 actions, and we can pay 5. Then we have this theater visit. Costs an action, costs 3. We're down to 2 actions, and we broke. And then finally we can still use our remaining 2 actions to still use the big party and to pay another 4 money. And so basically we -4 into debt, meaning that the blue player has won, although not by much. And that was a game. So, that was my overview of Last Wool. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I certainly did. I hope that by now you know how to play the game. I've basically taught you all the rules. I hope that you also have seen how the game feels when it's played, and maybe you could also decide based on that whether this is something you would enjoy. And finally, I also hope that I could bring the theme of the game a little bit closer to you by showing you how all these actions kind of tie in with the theme of spending as much money as you can, because I really think that the scene is very strong in this game, and it's a huge plus for me. So, basically, until next time, thanks for watching, and bye bye.